Well, today marks the first day of former President Jacob Zuma's 15-month prison sentence at the Estcourt Correctional Centre in KwaZulu-Natal. As we've been reporting, the former president was taken into custody in the early hours of this morning after he failed to hand himself in. A short while ago, Justice and Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola told the media, that the former president will be eligible for parole after serving a quarter of his sentence. Lamola also says that Zuma will be afforded dignity while in prison. Joining me now is my colleague Mzwandile Mbeje, the political editor here at SABC, just to unpack some of the issues for us. Thanks very much for joining us in studio, Mzwandile. Of course, top of mind really that the minister had to say, the Justice and Correctional Ministers had to say, is that Mr. Zuma will be treated with dignity.
A very good afternoon to you, Nombo, and the viewers. Absolutely. And even if you looked at the tone of the minister, to say this is not retributive, so this is not a vindictive action, and it's certainly not a time to celebrate, but really it's a process that everyone has to go through in order to comply with our laws and rules. You know that he was sentenced by the highest court in the land, and of course, given that that sentence was handed down, so he had to undergo it. But in all of that, so there has to be a humane element about it. I think that's the point that he was really stressing, to say even if he is inside the prison, but he will be treated as a normal human being.
Yeah. Mzwandile, let's take a listen to the minister when he was speaking specifically around the issue of not celebrating the fact that the former president has been incarcerated.
This is not a moment of celebration or triumphalism. It is a moment of restraint and to be human. In line with our mandate as a correctional services to treat all inmates in terms of the Nelson Mandela rules, which are universal rules for the treatment of inmates. Rule 1, the United Nations rule, is emphatic on all inmates shall be treated with respect due to their inherent dignity and value as human beings.
Mzwandile, one of the things, of course, that many South Africans will be watching closely, as much as it's very important that the president or former president is treated with dignity, that he's not treated any differently to other citizens. Your thoughts?
Oh, yes. I mean, at the end of it all, remember, this issue, Nombo, has divided people along factional lines, particularly within his political party. And that's why the minister is basically saying this is not a time to celebrate. In fact, it's even more interesting, Nombo, coming from someone like Minister Lamola. You know, he has been one of the staunchest opponents of former president. In fact, at some point, he held a lonely protest, I remember, outside the NEC because he was not happy with the happenings in the ANC. But for him to come and speak the way he's doing, so he's basically showing that he can rise above perhaps petty political issues. But at the same time, they cannot be seen to be doing anything differently in terms of preference to the former president, because as much as he needs to be afforded the humane way of being treated, which every other offender must be treated, so that must always come out. It must not be seen as if he is doing more than what is expected of him.
Now, one of the things the minister did speak to is the fact that the former president is being incarcerated or being isolated for now in line with COVID-19 regulations, but he's also going to go through a process where he's going to be medically assessed, and then, of course, they'll decide as to how he should be incarcerated going forward.
Oh, yes.
Precaution and in line with the COVID-19 measures, the former president will be placed in isolation for a period of 14 days. Furthermore, he will be assessed by our medical team in conjunction with the South African Health Military Services, and this will determine the conditions of his incarceration. This assessment is done to determine the major risks and needs of the offender. A complete profile report will then be submitted with recommendation to the Case Management Committee in line with all the assessments that have to be done. And this is an assessment that is done to all inmates upon their admission in any correctional facility. This process will assist to determine the appropriate classification of the former president in the facility.
Well, when you listen to that, Nombo, you'd remember that on Monday, on the 12th, the former president will be at Concord, basically to try and reverse this kind of sentence. One of the main reasons he's advancing there is the issue of his health and, of course, age. So when you hear Minister Lamola saying so he'll be isolated because they need to make sure that the health issues are not compromised. So it's basically about that. I mean, when he filed those papers, he basically said, even when he left the commission, so he had left it because he had gone to get the medication, so he has a medical condition, obviously, that he wouldn't want to disclose. And of course, he is someone who is now old, 79 years. So all those things, I guess, they are being considered, whilst they're being considered, making sure that he is treated like everyone else, but of course, taking into account his special factors in regard to his health.
Yeah, just touching on what you've said, of course, with Mr. Zuma still having two separate court processes happening related to his incarceration for contempt of court. Here's what the minister said about those court processes.
On the issue of what will happen when the Pietermaritzburg High Court makes a ruling tomorrow, we will cross the bridge when we reach there, and that's why it's a judgment. We all don't know what the judgment is going to be, so we will await the judgment, and upon release of the judgment, we'll study the judgment, and then it will direct us what to do. So that's what we're going to do with regards to the Pietermaritzburg High Court ruling, including the ruling that may come out in the Concord in the hearing that is going to happen on Monday.
So, Mzwandile, the R1 million or $1 million question that I put to you, do you think he's going to succeed on either score at the Pietermaritzburg Court and at the Constitutional Court?
Well, Nombu, that is difficult to say. But, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Having listened to the arguments, on Friday, that is tomorrow, the chances look very, very minimal. But, of course, we have to wait for the court because this is the highest court in the land, and I don't think the junior court could adjudicate on matters pronounced by the higher court. So there, it looks, it looks a bit difficult. As for Monday, Nombu, I guess if the success were to happen, perhaps it may have to be a reduction, let's say, in a sentence, given those factors we have spoken about. If, for example, the issue of, let's say, health, the age, and perhaps some special circumstances we may not have known about. So they could combine, and perhaps it could work out earlier than everyone thinks.
Mzwandile, thank you very much for your insights there. My colleague there, Mzwandile Mbeje, he's our political editor.